All right, everybody, hello and welcome to the reserve team. This is the third video on the channel, and for the very first time, history's being made with the reserve team podcast. We're going to probably look back at this episode in the future as to how bad we all used to be, but thankfully I don't have to suffer through it alone. I'm joined by two of our fantastic collaborators at the reserve team. First joining me, you may recognise him from the semi-pro potty, Bran Gibson. Thanks for joining us, Bran.
No worries, Sean. Very excited to be here.
And also along with us as well, you may know him from the Chitty Charter podcast. If you do follow that one closely, we're welcomed by Alex Dwyer. Thanks for joining us as well, Alex.
Thanks for having me along. Excited to be here, boys.
Yeah, very keen to get stuck in and discuss some football matters with you. And in today's podcast topic, we're going to be discussing the rise and fall of the Central Coast Mariners. There's a little bit of stuff that we're going to go through relating to their history. We've divided up into three different sections of their history throughout really the length that they've been a football club. And we're going to be discussing those in three different sections. The first one being the foundation era where they were conceived as a club from 2004 to 2010. What we would call potentially their most successful era, the pinnacle of the Central Coast Mariners, the Graham Arnold era from 2010 to 2013. And then really the modern era, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, in great depth when we get to it, from 2014 through to today. Just before we do get stuck into recapping a variety of that, I'll go to both of you guys for your thoughts and immediate impressions on the Mariners. Obviously, we don't want to spoil too much into the future, but Bram, what are some of your thoughts on the Mariners overall as a club and how you view them within the A-League itself?
Overall, as a club, I love them, to be honest. I mean, I'm a Melbourne City fan, but I've always had a big, huge soft spot for the Mariners. I mean, Central Coast Stadium's a beautiful stadium, great place to watch a game of football. The sauce bottles, you can't go past that. I've just always enjoyed having them in the league. I think they add a lot of value, whether that's good or bad. I think they're a great club to have.
Yeah, it depends, I guess, on what you'd mean by value to the league, and we'll go through that a little bit as we talk through the podcast discussion and topic. I think one of the things that's really interesting about Central Coast is if you assumed someone was going to look up football in Australia, Central Coast ground and the way it looks sat there right by the water with the palm trees, all that sort of stuff, it is very stereotypically Australian, and I think it does give out a good vibe to the rest of the league and the rest of the world for people looking into the A-League. Alex, you are based in New South Wales. You have probably travelled to the Central Coast Stadium more than any of us. What are some of your fondest memories of the Mariners and how they stand within the league?
One of the first times I went out to Gosford actually was a 7-2 loss to the Mariners. That was a fantastic little trip. But no, yeah, love seeing Central Coast play in the league and play at Gosford. It's a great stadium, like Bran said. A great place to go and watch football, and just a team that deserves to be in the league and hopefully playing some good football every season.
You aren't truly an A-League fan until you've watched your team get absolutely spanked away from home, and I'm sure that will be a recurring theme that comes up in the next few weeks of the podcast and content across the channel. Now, for anybody that is watching and has been following the website this week, it just went live on Monday. We've had a couple other videos come out throughout the course of the week as well. We are, of course, covering all things Australia, New Zealand football for both the A-League and the W-League as well. You will see further W-League content, you will see further New Zealand football content, but given the subject of this week's podcast, we are focusing specifically on the A-League with a couple of different touch points here and there to other clubs in and around the division as well. I'll run through first and go through their foundation era. Of course, the A-League itself started in the 2005 season, but the planning for Central Coast was well before that, right at the beginning of 2004. The governing body for football in and around Australia had grand visions of what they wanted the A-League to be for the initial 8 teams entering that competition. They wanted one in New Zealand, definitely. They wanted the other 7 to be based in Australia, and they had one specific spot set aside for what they determined to be a regional team. There were a couple of different areas that were potentially mooted as locations for that. I know Tasmania was in the discussion originally, Canberra as well. But in the end, the only real bid that came forward and applied for the licence was one based in Gosford on the central coast of New South Wales. They ran unopposed, so they were the very heavy favourites to be given that licence, and they were one of the earliest announced teams to be joining the competition, which I think might have just been coincidental with alphabetical order, with Adelaide and Central Coast being relatively high up the alphabetised list. They did experience great success in season 1. They appointed a very successful coach in Laurie McKenna, who had good standing within the football world within Australia. He was adamant that he wanted to set up something very special in that regional area and really create a community club that was very tight-knit within the Gosford community and with that coastal community around the area. He did make it his first signing, a local player in Damien Brown, who stayed at the club for a few seasons to help ingrain them into the local culture. He signed established NSL talent like Noel Spencer as the inaugural club captain, and brought across star striker, the previous Perth Glory championship winning striker from the last seasons of the NSL, Nick Merger, to lead the line up top. They won the short-lived A-League Preseason Cup, which only ran for a couple of seasons, but they did very well in it each year. And they finished third in the regular season and qualified for the first ever A-League Grand Final, following a narrow loss to Sydney FC. It was Dwight Yorke's led Sydney FC, Steve Corica getting the one goal to win that one, 1-0 in front of 41,689 spectators to start off the season and start off the league in fine form. In Season 2, they dropped off quite a bit, losing the final of the Pre-Season Cup to Adelaide, unable to defend their crown, and finishing 6th overall in the 8-team competition. Despite a downward on-field season, they did continue to grow off the park with record membership numbers, and they signed their first ever marquee player. At the time, a very rare occurrence for an Australian international to return to Australia, and they brought Tony Vidmar, international defender, back from NAC Breda, or PEC Zwolle. I will have to go and Google that one. Let me know in the comment section below which it was. From the Eredivisie back to Australia. At the time, relatively unheard of. They paid cash, they gave him a good contract, and he saw out his last few years at the club. This did mark a revamp towards how they were going to schedule and how they were planning their squad. They got away from some of the old NSL talent and really put a focus on creating younger squad players in and around not just the local area, but also all around New South Wales and the surrounding states as well. And that was marked by 22-year-old Alex Wilkinson in just his second season of senior football being handed to the captaincy of the overall club. Alex Wilkinson, of course, going on to have a fantastic career throughout the A-League. One of my favourite players, definitely. I'm sure he's one of Alex's as well. We'll talk about him further in the coming weeks. That change in ethos continued to have a great effect in Season 3 of the A-League, the 2007-2008 season, with that younger group winning the first championship, or first premiership, I should say, for the Central Coast, finishing on top of the table at the end of the regular season, and a narrow 1-0 defeat in one of the most spiteful grand finals of all time, an F3 derby against their local rivals, the Newcastle Jets. This game was infamous for a variety of different reasons, including the amount of yellow cards dished out during the game. It was also infamous for an uncalled handball in the box late on in the match that would have given the Mariners a chance to equalise from the penalty spot. And it also led to Danny Vukovic, at the time a 20-year-old goalkeeper in his first real senior season, striking referee Mark Shields on the arm, leading to a 6-month ban from all football that counted him out of, I think it would have been the 2008 Olympics, maybe? I'll have to go and double check that one as well. That's not all bad news, though. It did lead for another opportunity for the Mariners to bring home an Australian international, with former Manchester United and Aston Villa goalkeeper returning to Australia and playing his first games in the A-League on a 7-week contract for the Mariners. I'll go back and I'll come back to the starting lineup for that grand final in a moment, because I think it gives us some really good points to talk about when we review this period. But moving forward into Season 4, the club participated in the Asian Champions League for the first time. They again reinvested in youth in and around New South Wales and previously unknown talent or unproven talent at an A-League level. But after a long season and the additional fatigue that comes with Champions League qualification and group games, they faded to 3 defeats in a row in the regular season and finished in 4th place overall. They also suffered a first-round exit in the final series, their worst result in the final series to that date. But they had also added additional new youngsters into the side, including right-back Pej Bojic and cult hero Matt Simon. Season 5, the 2009-2010 season, again saw the club struggle in the league, ultimately finishing in 8th place, a single point above above bottom spot. Not all without hope. Young players like Matt Ryan, Bernie Abini, and others joined a growing list of players experiencing their first senior football with the Mariners. And at season's end, Laurie McKenna made the decision to step down as head coach, not leaving the club entirely, but becoming the football and commercial operations manager in the back office staff. This transition helped them set up for a really sustained period of success, which we'll get into further in a little bit. But there were some other unfortunate news off the field as well, with Football New South Wales announcing they were going to withdraw funding for the Mariners W League side, which subsequently meant that Mariners could no longer field 2 teams in elite level competition, and the Mariners W League side folding from that period on, where it still remains to this day. Before I hand back over to you guys to get your initial thoughts on that first few seasons for the Mariners, I just want to run you through the starting lineup for that grand final against Newcastle Jets, because some of the names that appear here are just ridiculous. They had Danny Vukovic in goal, a defence of Nigel Bugard, Tony Vidmar, Alex Wilkinson and Alvin Checkerley, a midfield of Mile Jedinak, John Hutchinson, Greg Owens and Adam Kosnich, and up top they had Sasho Petrovski and John Aloisi. First, I'll go to you, Bran. What are some of your thoughts on the initial period for the Mariners themselves, and just looking at that grand final lineup, some of the players that they unearthed during that time?
Well, the initial period as a whole was pretty successful. I mean, they made the finals 3 out of 5 seasons, qualified for 2 grand finals, and won a premiership. So for a team that was in a small market, that there was some uncertainty at how well they'd go. I think you got to say that that's a really good result. I mean, that's a quality start to their existence. And then when you take a look back at the grand final lineup, there's some names that really jump out there. I mean, Alex Wilkinson you mentioned as well, but even Mile Jedinak, future Socceroo, John Aloisi, returning Socceroo legend, they quality lineup.
What are some of your thoughts, Alex, on that initial period and that grand final lineup, looking back on it with hindsight?
The grand final lineup is insane, so unbelievably strong. I'm sure a lot of those people, if they were still playing football, would be welcomed at any A-League club. If you could bring that team back, I'm sure some A-League clubs would take that team now in their prime. A team that is extremely strong, and as a first 6 years, a great start to the league. No issues in terms of off-field troubles, bar the folding of the W League towards the end because of the withdrawing of funding. But other than that, it's a team that's really set up for future success, hopefully, and a strong start.
I think the interesting point that you made there, some of those players, that the careers that they've had, I think most clubs, even today at 37 or 38 or whatever he is now, would still take Mile Jedinak, and he'd probably get into most starting lineups despite not playing football for the best part of the last year. But Danny Vukovic is still playing, still in Europe, still goalkeeping at a high level. Nigel Bugard's still playing in and around the A-League. Alex Wilkinson's still going. He's just the elder statesman of the league at this point. And even some of the other guys like John Hutchinson, he was a full Malta international. Adam Kwasnic, he retired at 30, but he had consecutive seasons for about 6 years where he got double figures in goals in terms of the league. Sasho Petrovsky, John Aloisi, Tony Vidmar, they were all full Australian internationals. It is the first, and I know I said no future spoilers in the run sheet, but there are future spoilers coming up. It's the first of many incredibly strong Central Coast lineups that we've seen throughout their short history. That initial 6-year period, I think, is comparable to any 6-year period for any club throughout the history of the A-League in terms of their continued success and the strength of the squads that they've put together. If one day in the future, and Bran and I, you and I had one that came out on the channel earlier this week, we do like a tier list for the best 11 available for Central Coast. They just have so much depth across each of those positions. The players that they've got available on hand is absolutely ridiculous. So we will jump forward. We're going to split up a little bit of our recaps here with a couple of different segments throughout the course of the week and throughout the course of the podcast. As always, so much of the content that you guys see on the Reserve Team channel, on the Reserve Team website, wherever that happens to be, either here on YouTube or live on Twitch or anything like that, is going to be driven by the content that you guys want to see. So we're going to jump first into our mailbag questions, user submitted questions across Twitter in the comment section below. We'll jump across to that now. So the very first mailbag question that's come through has come from @NotMyBurner_account1289 over on Twitter. And its question is, the dream headline for the A-League season. We are, of course, in the off-season now. It's always a period of uncertainty. We never quite know what's going to be happening in terms of like TV rights deals, in terms of signings for new clubs. Obviously, the pandemic this year and coronavirus restrictions across the country have added another layer of complexity for the season ahead. But I'll go to you first, Alex. What would your dream headline be for the A-League season itself?
I think dream headline for the season would be A-League secures broadcast deal for next season. Obviously, there's been a bit of turmoil with Fox Sports and stuff like that, and we have got one more season being broadcasted, but after that, it's a bit of up in the air. So I think if we can lock in that the A-League will be televised and people will be able to watch it, that'll do wonders for the league in terms of just stability, something to build from.
Yeah, definitely. And I think if there's anyone that happens to be watching from Netflix or Amazon Prime or Stan or any of those live streaming services, those online platforms that we now consume most of our media and content from, if they want like 25 hours worth of content a week and any syndicated podcast such as our own to get involved in live streaming the A-League, that would be fantastic to see. It'd be great to see the A-League moving towards more of an online and streaming space rather than these horrific TV rights deals and revolving around Murdoch Media. What about for yourself, Bran? What would you love to see for the A-League season?
My dream headline would be perhaps some stage during the season, or more ideally the morning after the grand final, just a big old headline that says VAR saves the day. I think we've seen across the A-League, across football around the world, a lot of controversy surrounded with VAR. I mean, you mentioned, Sean, the Newcastle Jets Central Coast Mariners grand final, the handball that wasn't called. I think it would just be a little bit of a change to see VAR just work perfectly, exactly how it was intended, and for it to just have a positive impact on a big result and a game of football.
As long as it's consistent, that's all we want. If everything's a penalty, that's fine, but give everything as a penalty, and then we get more goals each week. It'll probably ruin whatever tipping predictions contest we have. It'll probably throw off a couple of multi-bets in and around the world, but as long as it's consistent, that's really all we want from VAR. We're going to jump back in. We're going to continue our recap, and I'm going to hand over to you, Bran, to take the next section for us, which is probably the most successful period in the Mariners era, the Graham Arnold era itself.
Yeah, so jumping into it, the Graham Arnold era, also known, I reckon, as Graham's golden era, as you pointed out, it was the start of a very, very successful time at the Central Coast Mariners. Australian national team assistant Graham Arnold was placed in charge. He brought with him a bit more of a global recruitment strategy. He added Dutchman Patrick Zwanswijk and Patricio Perez to the squad. That still, though, didn't keep him from attracting plenty of Australian youth. Rustin Griffiths, Oliver Bozanic, Trent Sainsbury, Mustafa Amini all joined a young Australian core. In that 2010-2011 season, they performed better than expected. They finished second in the league behind runaway leaders Brisbane Roar. They qualified for the Champions League, and they finished qualified for the Champions League, and they qualified for the grand final, in a game considered to be an A-League classic. They lost to Brisbane after leading 2-0 at halftime in extra time. It was a last gasp header that equalised for Brisbane Roar, and then they went on to win the game on penalties. Taking a look, we mentioned the lineup for their first grand final against the Jets. The lineup for this as well was equally loaded. You had Matt Ryan, you had Pej Bojic, Alex Wilkinson, Patrick Zwanswijk, Josh Rose, Roston Griffiths, Michael McGlinchey, Ollie Bozanic, Mustafa Amini, Matt Simon, and Adam Kwanzic. So, lads, again, another pretty potent grand final lineup there.
Yeah, and I think the big one that calls out is it wasn't just that they were giving talented Australians within Australia, coming through academy ranks, coming through the AIS, which we'll talk about again in future weeks. They were also giving first team opportunities to players that potentially hadn't got them previously in their careers. I think Roston Griffiths came from the Blackburn Rovers Academy over in England. I think Ollie Bozanic came back from the Reading Academy, neither of them having made any first team appearances for those clubs during their developmental years. They continued to have a really, really strong record of giving their first the first taste of senior football to quite a few of the players, including even in that grand final lineup. Alex, I'll let you talk about these ones a little bit further, but the likes of Matt Ryan and Mustafa Amini, just elite level players as far as the A-League is concerned.
Yeah, Matt Ryan and Mustafa Amini, especially in that lineup, have gone on to do fantastic things and really launched their career off the back of being blooded at the Central Coast by Arnie, and coming through a youth system that was giving opportunities to the youngsters and not afraid to let them play football consistently. And yeah, again, what a lineup. If you're going to lose Danny Vukovic, you may as well take Matt Ryan in. Stuff like, if you're going to lose Emile Jednak, you've got Ollie Bozanic and Mustafa Amini coming in, and Roston Griffiths. You complain. It just keeps getting better. So yeah, what a start to the start of the Arnie era.
Well, season 7, so 2011-2012, saw the departures of Amini. He went off to Dortmund, but returned on loan. Matt Simon and Roston Griffiths also departed, but the Mariners were still successful. They won the premiership by 2 points over the Brisbane Roar. 2 points ahead of the Brisbane Roar. They failed to make the grand final, though, falling in the preliminary final stage to the Perth Glory. Again, though, an incredibly strong squad. In addition to the players that we just mentioned, we were talking about before, we also saw first-team appearances for Tom Rogic, Anthony Caceres, and Mitch Duke, and as well their academy side won the youth league, the Y League. Season 8 in 2012-2013 again saw departures with Amini leaving permanently. Alex Wilkinson left. Tom Rogic went off to Celtic, but again, the club performed well. They finished second place in the regular season behind Western Sydney, qualified for the knockout round stage of the Champions League, and they made the grand final again, facing off this time against the Western Sydney Wanderers, who they would go on to beat 2-0, marking their first championship in 4 attempts. And Daniel McBreen won the Golden Boot that year, the Central Coast Mariners' first and so far only Golden Boot award.
Yeah, again, like we'll probably talk about a little bit further at the end, comparing the two grand final lineups throughout this period, but they just had such a factory setup in terms of high quality players going out of the club, but replacing them with players that are just as good, if not better. If you've got Alex Wilkinson leaving a club for probably 9 out of the 10 teams in the league at this particular period, that would destroy them for the next year. And they had Trent Sainsbury step up and go straight back in. And I think a lot probably needs to be credited to Graham Arnold, and he did the same thing when he was at Sydney and creating kind of that siege mentality. It's us against the world. They must have had a very tight-knit group and community, because he let one of those players marry his daughter eventually down the track in Trent Sainsbury. So what they had going on at that particular time and that squad that they were able to put together was incredibly special.
Yeah, and looking over the whole, those 3 years under the start of the golden Graham era, they finished second, first, and second. That's pretty darn dominant. So season 9 sort of capped off the end of the Graham Arnold era, 2013-2014. Just 10 weeks after signing a 2-year contract extension with the Mariners, it was announced that Arnold would depart for J1 League side, Vigalta Sendai. I am not a huge J League enthusiast, so I've absolutely butchered that pronunciation. That's what I get for not trying to pronounce that prior to recording the podcast, lads. Phil Moss took over, and this really sort of signified the end of the golden era that we were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, you just got to take that Lucy Zelich confidence into pronunciations. Like, just say it like you know how it sounds.
Yeah.
And then if there are any J1 fans in or watching this episode, you can let us know in the comment section below how bad we butchered it. But that's exactly how I would have said it. I just say them literally whenever I can think about it. Now, one of the interesting parts about that last little portion, the end of the Graham Arnold era, so to speak, is that around that time there were rumours that Peter Turnbull, the owner of Central Coast Mariners, was having trouble paying players, and that late payments were very common for both the staff in the playing group and the back office staff as well. In subsequent years, Graham Arnold claimed that he actually paid players out of his own pocket if they had payments for their mortgages or cars or whatever else that were due at that particular time. It's those sort of things that I think, one, they're not super unique to Australian football and to Australian sport throughout the course of history, but it must have done a tremendous amount to try and galvanise the strength of that team in that title winning season, in that grand final winning season. If there is a coach or a manager paying out of his own pocket, Alex, you're the only person here that's actually had Graham Arnold as a club manager. How would you sum up his time as a manager? Having the added bonus of retrospect with how he performed when he was at Sydney FC.
Him as a manager personally, it seems like he creates a great atmosphere in the dressing room, a family-like atmosphere, and it's what we've heard a lot about at Sydney FC. Everyone getting on so well, and the chemistry working really well, and the same has happened at Central Coast. And I think people maybe forget about it because of where Sydney FC is at in the league at the moment. But you look at the stability that he brought into the team with a pretty similar lineup, losing a few key players, but bringing in people who become key players for the Mariners 2 years later. And yeah, every season performing well, unlucky to miss out on a final. But I guess that's what you get when you have final series in Australia. You can sometimes fall out, even if you are the best team throughout the whole season. But yeah, a manager who brings a lot of stability and a great feeling amongst a squad, I'd say.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, we've called this a Graham Arnold era. I think calling it, the golden era is also a very apt way to describe it, Bran. I think it really represents not just the pinnacle for Central Coast Mariners, but really to have that concerted level of high performance being involved in, towards the top of the table across various years, making grand finals, putting together the quality of some of the sides that they've got listed. That's as good a 3-year period as any club has had throughout the course of the A-League. I would put them up, maybe not at the same tier, but definitely in the same discussion relating to, that Raw Salona side of Ange Postecoglou, even Graham Arnold, Sydney FC sides, how strong they have been over the last few seasons as well. An incredibly strong time and an incredibly strong period for the Central Coast. But we're again going to take a break there. We're going to introduce another segment. We're going to jump straight into that one now, and I'll explain to you guys how we're going to run that one moving forward. So this is the Reserve Team Hall of Fame. Again, I've said, episode 1, a whole bunch of history is going to be made throughout the course of this episode, and we're going to make further history today with our first inductee into the Reserve Team Hall of Fame. Now, the way this is going to work, gentlemen, is each of us are going to nominate someone for the Hall of Fame, and then we're going to give our fans the chance to actually vote for who goes in as the inaugural guest. This first vote will probably be the collaborators on the reserveteam.com.au. You can check out all of their details live now on the website. There are full links in the description below as well. But moving forward, future weeks, we are going to put this out to be a Twitter poll. So we're each going to make a nomination. We're going to put it up for a Twitter poll. We will announce the winner and the first inductee into the Reserve Team Hall of Fame next week. I'll hand over to you first, Alex. Who's going to be your nomination as the first person to go into the Reserve Team Hall of Fame?
My first nomination is a man who was mentioned for having a brief stint in the league, but is probably more well known for his punditry and expertise on football. Mark Bosnich, a man who enjoyed a bit of partying over in Europe and then has returned to Australia and is a great voice for fans and football. Football fans across Australia, especially when there was the issues with people's bans from stadiums being made public and stuff like that, and people losing jobs, and there were fan walkouts and everything like that. And Bozza got around it and said, you know what, football can't survive without its fans, but fans will do without football if they have to. I just think a great character of the league, and you can't go past his laugh and his hair. So that's my first nomination.
He definitely had a whole lot of fun during his European career. Some would say too much, but he's all the better for it. And he's, I think, the premier A-League expert. You've just got to ask him, and don't let him find out about it on Twitter, or you will feel his wrath. Bran, who are you going to nominate for the first Reserve Team Hall of Fame?
Well, my nomination is someone who was caught in probably one of the most iconic moments in A-League history. Sticking with the Central Coast Mariners theme, it is the barbecue sauce mascot that was videoed giving away fans the finger. I just think that moment is so good on so many levels. Just the fact that the Mariners have a barbecue sauce mascot in the first place. It was on the pitch prior to the game, walking past the travelling Newcastle Jets fans who were heckling him, and he then responded by giving him the middle finger while being filmed. So there's just an iconic photo of a sauce bottle on the pitch giving the fans the finger, and I just think that's just an iconic moment in A-League history that deserves to be enshrined in the Reserve Team Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I like to think that whoever gets the honour of wearing the sauce bottle mascot costume every week is the biggest Central Coast Mariners fan on the planet. Like, at least they care. At least he was into it. And if anyone from Masterfoods is listening, we are open to any sponsorship opportunities that they want to throw our way as well. I'll get the ad read sorted. I'll flip off whoever they need me to. That's absolutely fine. From my end, I am going to nominate, and it's a pretty elite tier list, the one that we've got here in terms of our first round of nominations, but I'm going to nominate David Squires from The Guardian. For those of you that aren't familiar with his work, he does these fantastic satirical cartoons each week, both for the Premier League itself and for the A-League. I think he did previously live in Brisbane. I haven't actually gone and checked. He might have moved back to England, where he was from originally, but his work is absolutely fantastic. The things that he sees in the game, and in terms of ways that he's going to take the piss out of it, the likes of Eric Monbert laying in a robe on a bearskin rug or whatever else, the things that he used to say about Kevin Muscat when he was in the league. I'm sure he said some fantastic things about Graham Arnold and the Mariners throughout the course of history as well. But I think what he does to bring exposure, not just to the game overall, but to bring A-League exposure to the rest of the world through his partnership with The Guardian and the high quality of work that he puts out, he's as worthy a nominee as ever. And I'll probably continue to nominate him every week until we actually vote him in. So by all means, even if he doesn't get through this week, you'll definitely be hearing about him in future. He's also got some fantastic coffee table books and whatever else. If you want the links to how you can get those, either hit me up on Twitter or drop it in the comment section below. But 3 very wonderful nominations, gentlemen. We've gone very big for the first podcast of the series. As of next week, we will take that to be a Twitter poll as well, so that all of you listening get to put in not just your own nominations, but help decide which of our nominations actually make it and are inducted into the Reserve Team Hall of Fame. We are going to jump back in now to talk about the modern era of the Mariners themselves, the 2014 through to present period. And Alex, I'm going to hand over to you so that you can run us through what is now known as the Central Coast Memeaners, or the meme team, or whatever else you want to describe them as during this period.
Yeah, so following Arnie's departure, the Central Coast entered the era of, I guess, like you said, descent, or the Memeaners, or the plummet, you might even say. There's a lot you could go through, but we'll do a quick summary of it all because there is a lot of change happening at the team. So in season 9, 2013-14, Mark Charlesworth takes over full control as owner and chairman. And you see a mass departure of Boich, Ryan, Abini, Bazanik, McBreen, and Zwanzwijk, and during the off season, and then in season you see McGlinchey and Sainsbury also depart the club. They still managed to finish third in the regular season, but the academy finished bottom after previously winning the Y League during Arnie's era. So potentially a sign of things to come for the team, and they get knocked out in the semi-finals. In season 10, in 14-15, Moss is sacked in March and replaced by longtime academy manager Tony Walmsley. They lose their Champions League qualifier and finish 8th with a club record 14 defeats. And at that time, it was their club record, but it may get worse in the future. And it does get worse next season in season 11 as they finish bottom of the table and record 20 defeats, which is now a league record and not the first time they do it. After watching Louis Garcia in a Liverpool Legends versus Socceroo Legends match, they decide maybe this could be a bit of recruitment. This could be the spark we've been needing, and they recruit him at 37 years old. Season 12 in 16-17, they finish in 8th. Walmsley is sacked in August, and Paul Ocon is appointed, and the team shows initial promise to move off the bottom of the table. I think for me, the appointment of Paul Ocon was a time that I thought this could be the change they need. He's come from, I believe he was head of the under-20s and assistant for the under-23s at this point for the Socceroos. And when I saw that, I was like, okay, this could be it. This could be the turn of the Central Coast back to glory. I don't know what you guys thought. Sean, do you have any opinions on when Ocon was made manager?
Look, I sat through the very worst of the Melbourne Heart days. I wore that Kappa turtleneck in the summer degrees of whatever it was during that period. So I know what it's like to be in and around the bottom of the division for consecutive seasons. But even just the couple of years that you've looked at, 10th, 8th, 10th, whatever else, they were definitely lost, and they really kind of struggled to find their identity and what they wanted to be in the league after the Graham Arnold era. Whereas I think the initial period that we've spoken about, they were very much focused on how do we bring through the best young talent available and build the squad that way. During the Arnold era, I think they were concerned about how do we now take this very exciting young Australian call and give them the right people around them, like Patrick Zwanzwijk, like even Sasho Petrovsky, John Aloisi in the early years, to support them so they can be an elite level team. And I think Danny McBreen filled that role. But then they really did seem kind of lost until Paul Ocon was appointed. The interesting thing about his appointment is that he came in with, like you mentioned, a good record of developing young players through the international team setup. And that was, I think, what they were trying to get back to, bringing through really strong young players into the division itself and giving them their first opportunities at first team football. What does become interesting with that, and as we get through into future spoilers a little bit here in a moment, is that he didn't want to continue that run that much further. I think he looked at the squad and saw basically maybe not the talent there that they had in previous seasons, previous years, whether that's down to backroom staff or just the availability, or perhaps the rest of the league catching up in terms of their recruitment. And when he eventually left the club, it was based on the back that he wasn't getting enough support in the transfer market itself. So potentially he was brought in to fulfill one particular ethos and get him back to one particular structure or club style. But then, you know, as things played out and as football results, as things are ultimately determined by the wins and losses that they get, wanted to kind of try and change that. And that lack of consistency they've had in terms of a long-term vision, I think, is what really kind of hurts them during this period.
Yeah, definitely. And so following that, in season 13, they finish in 10th place. And we see a bit of magic of the Cup for the first time in the FFA Cup, with Blacktown City, an NPL side from New South Wales, knocking them out 3-2 in the round of 32. And Ocon leaves in March and is replaced by a caretaker. The following season, we see another new manager enter in at Central Coast in 18-19. Mike Mulvey is appointed. but is later sacked in March after a pretty terrible run, and is replaced by ousted Matilda's boss, Alan Stajcic. And rounding out the descent in the 1920 season, they finished bottom yet again in 11th place in the expanded competition, 5 points behind 10th place Victory and 19 points behind the finals positions. Bran, what's your overall take on the descent era, on the overturn at the club in players and managers?
It was a chaotic time. It still is a chaotic time. I think Sean and Alex, you sort of both alluded to it. When we talk about the early period of the Mariners, they were able to bring through so many young players, and then and so many good young players, and then once they departed, they were able to replace them really with equally or even better players. And I think we've seen through the descent, they've just not been able to hit on that. As far as managers go, they've really, really struggled to find someone who can get the best out of the team. Mike Mulvey, he won a premiership with the Brisbane Roar and won the grand final there, and then he comes into the Mariners, and I think he had 22 games in charge and he only wins one. So it's tough to say whether that's down to the manager or the players. I think it's down to both. I just think they've really lacked identity and they've really lacked direction.
And I think a good point that you make there as well, Bran, is that Mike Charlesworth doesn't necessarily seem to have the right... It's hard to be critical of him because he might blast me on Twitter and we might already get ourselves banned from certain institutions in the first week of the podcast, but just by the different manager appointments that they've made, they appointed Tony Walmsley, who had a great record in the academy and producing a lot of those great players that we've spoken about. They brought in Paul Ocon, that was kind of in the similar mould again, but then they kind of went the opposite direction entirely with Mike Mulvey, who's a player that had dealt with an elite level Brisbane side and hadn't really had a strong track record during that period of putting things in place to have a succession or to keep a side at the top in that sort of premiership cycle that we talk about. So it looks like in a lot of their appointments, they just tend to make on-the-fly decisions. Even their current manager, who has lasted, I think, the longest of any of the coaches in the modern era, Alan Stajcic, he was coming off the back of a very tumultuous time in the Matildas international side, where he was voted out by that whole vote from the playing group, whether it was true or wasn't true. That survey that eventually saw him lose his job at a key and critical time for the international side. They still, I don't think, they've more just been pulling the trigger on different things without really having that long-term view that they did so well in the early parts of the competition and during the Graham Arnold era.
Yeah, definitely. And even their fan attendance and membership numbers take a bit of a plummet during this time. In the most recent season, they only averaged 4,800. Obviously, that might have to do with lockdown numbers and stuff like that, and minimal attendance in New South Wales for games. But after a period during Arnie's reign of 8,000 to 9,000 average attendance each season, it had continued to descend. And following the 17-18 season, where they averaged just over 7,000, the next season they averaged only 5,500. So you see fans start to drop off, and the most recent season of 4.8k average attendance. The only teams with lower attendance no longer play in the league, which is North Queensland, Gold Coast, and New Zealand Knights. So not a great sign in terms of that, but there are positives to take from it. There was the Knicks in, Knicks out campaign when we've seen them struggle with attendance as well, and they were struggling to play quality football. But after two good coaches joined the fold in Rudin and Talai, they've made the finals twice in a row, and I've been producing some really good football and blooding some youngsters as well in Cammy Devlin and Max Burgess when he was there for a little bit. So there are positives to take from it potentially, but not an overall great period at the club.
Well, I think Alex, the point you make about the Knicks, I think that's a great example of a club that seemed to be on its knees at one stage and how they've been able to turn things around pretty quickly. I think for the Mariners, you can look at that and go, do you know what? Why can't we do that as well? I like the stats that you had on the attendances as well. Those make for some pretty bleak reading, to be honest. I have some stats as well, guys, if you want to hear it. Sean, I know you love to stay positive, so we'll start off with some positive. Looking back on those first 9 seasons, we said the Graham Arnold era was the golden era, but over the course of the 9 years, they had a lot of really good stats go their way. They had the most points in the league. They had the fewest defeats in the league. They had the most finals qualifications. I think they made the finals 7 out of 9 seasons, which is a remarkable hit rate. They had the most Asian Champions League qualifications, the most grand final appearances. They had the second most wins, only behind Brisbane. Only behind the Brisbane Roar. They won the championship twice and the premiership once. And then we were talking about dominant stretches there under Graham Arnold and then and Phil Moss as well. They finished second, first, second, and third. At the time, they were the only team in A-League history to finish in the top 3 in 4 consecutive seasons. Not the victory to start off the A-League, not Brisbane Roar during the same sort of period. The only other team who's been able to do that is Sydney FC in the last 4 seasons. So when you sort of frame it like that, it kind of puts a little bit of context on how good they really were. Unfortunately, though, the stats in relation to their plummet do not make for as good or as a positive outlook as Sean you might like this segment to have. They've missed the finals in 6 consecutive seasons. That is the second longest drought in league history. They finished bottom of the league 3 years running and 4 times in the last 5 years. No team has ever finished last more often than the Central Coast Mariners. Also, no other team has ever finished last in consecutive seasons. The only other one were the New Zealand Knights, and now the Mariners have just gone ahead and finished last 3 times in a row. Alex, you mentioned they hold the record for the most losses in a season with 20. They did that twice. And over the last 6 years, they've lost a massive 103 games, which is 30 more than any other team. And it's also 39 losses more than they had in their first 9 years combined. And the closest gap they've had to a final spot is 11 points. And then I think they finished with just 13 points twice, which is the lowest points total since the inaugural season of the A-League, New Zealand Knights again.
I think we're going to change the name of the podcast to The Rise and Plummet of Central Coast Mariners for the rest of the episode. But I think the one that sticks out at me, the biggest one there, is the 103 games during that modern period. Because when you consider most of the A-League seasons are usually around 25 to 27 games, depending on how many teams in the league that year, that's effectively 4 entire seasons with just defeats. Without talking about draws, without talking about any victories, they have spent 4 years of the last 6 losing games, which is just a phenomenal stat to look at.
Well, I think the team with the second most losses is the Newcastle Jets. So they would have to play, if the Mariners didn't play next year, if they played every game and lost every single game, they still wouldn't have as many losses as the Mariners. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's a ridiculous stat to look at, and they don't do anything in the middle. They are either at the top of the division, as far as this recap's concerned, or they are the worst side in the division. They have never been effectively a mid-table side. We have focused now for a little bit in this episode about, the negative experience and the descent of them. They have offered a bit to the league, but I think you mentioned it previously, Bran. Most of that have been memes that they have presented to the group. So we're going to jump in now. We're going to examine some of those memes further and discuss a little bit of the context around those stories and around what they present to the group. So jumping straight in, the first meme that we're going to look at, and this was effectively, I think, a long-running joke that they had. 303 days since the last win. This was a Mariners fan group presenting this at each of their matches. And I think that, and I could be wrong, by all means, let me know in the comment section below if I get this incorrectly, that lead actually only went away at 327 days. So at the time that this screenshot was taken, they didn't have that much longer to go for a win, but nearly made it a full calendar year without winning a singular game of football, which is absolutely crazy. Thoughts, and do you guys remember this particular period? I think it must have been about 2 seasons ago in that Mike Mulvey reign when this sign actually came out.
Oh, just how bad they were. I think you're right that it was 2018, the year they lost 20 games. It's when you see a number like that, 303, it's just remarkable.
I can't imagine being a fan having to try and go to that game, but I guess that is the way you entertain yourself. You try and have a lighthearted joke about
I suppose
terrible form.
I suppose after 150 days, what's another 50 days without a win? Yeah, just add them on. It's no big deal.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and maybe that kind of speaks to a part or a little bit to their regional nature in that they probably don't have to compete with any other really like sporting franchises for market share with other codes. Like there's no AFL game or rugby league game for anyone in Gosford to go and watch. There really isn't any excuse. And I think you mentioned in your stats, Alex, that 2007-2008 season was their biggest when they finished on top of the table, when they had that F3 Derby Grand Final. Like they potentially, regardless of their results, could be, capturing the hearts and minds of the local community and getting more people to those games. So the hope is they don't see a run like this going forward. But in reality, like anyone who's still going to Mariners games definitely deserves a pat on the back for sticking with them for so long. Even in our Melbourne Heart days, Bran, like we weren't anywhere near that level of awful, thankfully. Jumping forward to the next one, this is actually part of an overall thing for the league itself, but it was one of the previous periods where all A-League active fan groups, as a protest of part of the FFA, there's lack of support, really, in terms of those banned fans that we discussed further when talking about Mark Bosnich and a few other things, actually decided to boycott a lot of the A-League fixtures in a particular weekend. This sign representing Gone to the Pub was the lowest attendance in A-League history and the lowest attendance for the Central Coast when I think just under 4,000 people actually attended the match. This would have been in 2016, I believe, gents. Do you remember the original discussions around those band supporters? Bran, do you remember anything that came through at that time?
Yeah, I do. I just remember, as you mentioned, all the active areas sort of uniting. Often the clubs, in particular with their rivals, there's a lot of division. But this sort of seemed to bring in all the active areas together. Sean, we're city fans, but like everyone, even with Victory fans, everyone seemed to be united on this in protecting fans and the welfare of the game. And I'm sure, Alex, it would have been the same with Sydney and Western Sydney, where everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, I think it's one of the first times I've heard of active support group leaders getting together to talk to governing bodies and such and work out a way around a pretty serious situation in terms of people's criminal records and stuff being made public or like fines and things like that and bans from stadiums. So I think it was really good to see everyone band together, and I think Central Coast probably had one of the more entertaining takes on it rather than just marching out. They left a sign and probably were at the pub.
Yeah, and I think for a smaller club like Central Coast, like the fact that, it kind of shows like without the fan support there, lowest record in the division, lowest record for the club itself. Like once those fans disappear and stop going to the games, there really isn't much point to it outside of that community involvement and community engagement. So an interesting and unique time, not entirely the fault of Central Coast, but always one to look back on.
Well, Sean, are you sure that isn't just the updated sign after the 303 days since the last loss? They just flipped it over, said go on to the pub and left it for the next game?
Yeah, you can kind of see the threes coming through if you zoom in on it really closely. But yeah, they're making most out of the materials that they've got on hand. Jumping forward now to this famous gentleman, while we don't advocate anyone invading the pitch at any sporting event, a man in a moon boot and on two crutches managed to make his way all the way out onto the pitch during the course of a game. Probably more of an allegory than anything else to the off-field situation at Central Coast Mariners. The fact that a guy with only one fully working leg could make his way all the way onto the pitch before being reprimanded by security and operations personnel. He didn't interrupt the game from memory, but he did actually kick on quite a bit. I think he took 3 or 4 different guards down with his crutches during this fracas. Do you guys remember when this one actually took place? I think it was the 2017 season, if I remember correctly.
I don't remember specifically, but I remember watching the moment. I love that he's not even wearing a Mariners jersey. I think it's a Cricket Australia top as well. So it's just like, I don't know. But, in defence to the security guards, when you're seeing a guy hobbling onto the field in crutches, are you expected to crash tackle him? I don't know what you're meant to do there. He
got pretty far before anyone even asked him what he was doing. And I think that was more the nature about how it had gone and whatever else. But yeah, he's got a cricket top on. He's got rugby league shorts on. He might have been sent by a different code to try and bring the game into disrepute. I'm not entirely sure. Alex, do you remember this incident? Was it a bigger deal in New South Wales?
I don't remember the specific time it happened, but I do remember seeing it happen. And I think you said that maybe it was as a different code bringing the game into disrepute, but I think it builds on the character of what the A-League really is. Just random things happening throughout the season that everyone really enjoys. And I guess some people might think it's negative, but it brings a bit of light to the A-League, which the A-League probably needs. And just entertaining. Like, how does he get so far without someone being like, hang on a second, you aren't a player?
The league is nothing if not unpredictable at its very worst.
And I think we'll see with a few of these memes, they've got layers, it's not just one sort of shambolic moment. It's not just a pitch invader. It's a pitch invader on crutches. It's not just that. He's wearing, a different code. And then, as you said, John, he was on there for ages. It's so many tiers to it.
Ridiculous. We jump forward to the next one, and this one is perhaps the one that we can blame on the Central Coast themselves. In a game against Perth Glory, a goal ruled out for offside, correctly ruled out for offside, saw Perth defender Tomislav Merchella fall into the back of the net. As he fell into the back of the net, he dragged the goalpost down with him. It snapped at the bottom right-hand side. Unfortunately, for the Central Coast, they didn't have a spare goal anywhere within 20 minutes of the ground itself. It took over 40 minutes, a stoppage of play where both sets of players from Perth Glory and Central Coast had to return to the changing room for about half an hour before they were able to wheel out a replacement goal. Really, just farcical. We'll talk about it in the next slide as well, why this was especially difficult that the game got delayed for 40 minutes. But gents, I'll start with you first, Bran. Do you have any memories of this particular incident in the league?
Yes, this is like the best moment in A-League history. Like, with this whole meme show, this whole podcast could have been just about this game. Because what was it before then? There was the section of the grandstand that they had to, fans weren't allowed in because there was a nesting seabird in it. So, there was a part of the stadium that was blocked off. Then the goals break. There was the kid in the grandstand waving around the toy gun as well. And then, it was just so
next week when we do a meme corner, you've got to set them up because I can't believe I forgot about the nesting seagull because I've left it out of the report.
And then the kid with the gun, it's just like there's I mentioned it before, there's just so many layers to this one. And it makes you wonder, how at a professional footballing venue is there not a spare pair of goals? I mean, to be fair, you wouldn't need them very often, but surely they would just be closer than the training facilities. And a 40-minute wait, it was just nuts. So and then they had halftime afterwards.
Yeah, so just on the 40-minute wait, not only was this game, an A-League match taking place on a Saturday night, it was also the last Saturday night before New Year's Eve. So there were family fireworks organised. It might have actually been New Year's Eve. I'd have to go back and look in the calendar. But there were family fireworks organised to kick off at 9 o'clock. And when they called the council to say we've had a 40-minute delay, the council said, we don't care, we're going on with the fireworks anyway. This is a picture of those fireworks from the other end of the field. And you can see the stadium is essentially empty because anyone that had families, anyone that had kids that wanted to go watch the fireworks left the match about 5 minutes into the second half to go and watch the end of year New Year's Eve fireworks across in front of the beach there. So just when you think it can't get any worse for Central Coast, you can see just here, it's probably a bit hard to see on the screen, just down here on the ground, the old goal that they've just thrown out like it's council pickup trash, waiting for someone to come and collect it. But when things get bad for Central Coast, they get even worse within the next half an hour.
I think the fireworks were set on timers, so they were always going to go off at 9. So there was no stopping them, and then they just ended up going off during the middle of the game. So the players are playing and the commentators are talking, and there's just fireworks going off in the background. It's so good.
You got to love the meme league. Jumping forward to the next one, and this, of course, not specifically a meme, depending on who you support and how you look at the A-League itself, but probably the most high-profile trialist that any club in world football has had in the last 5 or 6 years. Usain Bolt, previous gold medal winner, obviously the 9.5 second record for the 100-metre sprint, trialled with the Mariners for, I think he made 4 appearances, and one was in an inter-club friendly with some other volunteers and things like that. Alex, what are your immediate thoughts and opinion on Usain Bolt's trial with the Mariners and what that meant for the league as a whole?
When news broke it was going to happen, I wasn't sure if it was real or not. And I mean, he did score 2 goals in the game, which it's not terrible. He can obviously play football, whether that's to a standard higher than we can play football, still can be argued. I look at it more as probably a marketing stunt really than anything else. And the marketing something that could have gone well, but didn't really do much, and probably made people look at the ad and be like, "Really, you're the ones that gave him the shot?"
Yeah, I think this is one of those scenarios where, like, not all publicity is good publicity, and someone probably needs to sit down, the Central Coast staff, and say to them in the office, "Hey guys, like, he's never played football. He's 31 years of age. He's not football conditioned the way he's a sprinter and obviously an elite level athlete, but it's very different sprinting for football and sprinting on a straight track." It just screamed at me as being some sort of relevant, like, desperate claw for relevance for a side that really hadn't had much to celebrate in previous years. What were your thoughts, Bran, on Usain Bolt's trial period with the Mariners?
Well, I've just got a couple of points to make. One, you mentioned that it was a marketing ploy. I think it was a huge marketing success. I mean, it definitely worked on me. I'll move my camera down here. I am wearing the Central Coast kit from the same year, and on the back, 95 volts. So as far as marketing goes, huge marketing success. But I definitely agree that it sort of brought unwanted attention, because the Mariners then proceeded to lose 20 games in a year and finish bottom. So it pretty much just brought international, worldwide attention to a team in the midst of terrible struggles, who then went on to have more terrible struggles.
And also, like, if you think about, well, there's two different layers to this, right? I'm glad that they sold 3 shirts and that you're one of the owners that actually got one.
Yep.
But then at the same time, like, imagine being a young player trying to come through in a Mariners squad that you know is going to struggle, that you know is going to have a tough year, and you've got a guy coming in who I think at the time wanted like $3 million for the year to play a full season and to sign a permanent contract, who's never played the game before, who obviously is a very high-level athlete but isn't necessarily a footballing personality, so to speak. While he is a fan, he's essentially just a rich fan, and that's pretty much all there is to it. I could see this being, if you're someone like a Jordan Murray who's come through the NPL and is trying to get his first opportunity in an A-League club, watching him come in and just being given kind of opportunities afforded to him as like a marquee player, essentially, having never played a professional game, like, I think that would be very tough, and that would be hard to integrate into a club atmosphere. Interestingly, or not surprisingly to anyone, his trial period was unsuccessful and he was not signed on a permanent deal. We should be clear to anyone who hasn't kept up with the Mariners over the last few seasons.
Well, I think that's a great point to make as well, Sean. Like you mentioned, youngsters and people in the A-League are always talking about how they want more opportunity given to young Australian players, in particularly from, the NPL, to have a chance at the peak level here in Australia. And if you've got Usain Bolt taking up one of those spots, what benefit is that to the game?
Yeah, and I don't think, even if it had worked out perfectly for the Mariners, there was no way he was going to be the thing that fired them above the bottom of the table. They were essentially maybe going to have one good left winger. Didn't they already have Tommy Orr at this point, who is a decent left winger option anyway? But it was something to that effect. There was nothing that Usain Bolt on his best day was ever going to do to really pull them out of the scenario that they were in. They were always going to be expected to finish towards the bottom of the division, no matter how good he ended up being. We jump forward now, and this one I do have to give you guys a bit of a reference point for, because I'm not sure if everyone's aware of it. This was a racing day that the Central Coast Mariners playing group went and participated in the 2017-2018 season. The club rules for the players that were there were that they weren't allowed to drink and they weren't allowed to stay out past a particular time. The man on the left of this image is Andrew Hull, at the time Central Coast winger, alongside former Socceroo and Everton youth product David Carney, holding a drink in his hand and posting to his own Instagram this photo after that alleged curfew. I think the big one that we've included this for is just the change in culture and atmosphere at the club and some of the different disciplinary things that they've had to go through over the last few seasons. Alex, I'll hand over to you. You've seen Andrew Hull in a Sydney FC shirt. What are your immediate thoughts and opinions on this particular episode in Central Coast's recent history?
Andrew or Danny, depending on which one you want to go by, just is comical. I'm not sure if he's still on his European journey or not. But like you said, it really is. It shows the cultural shift going from producing these amazing youth talent and being really, really successful to bringing in people who have bounced around a couple teams in the A-League, who've had some off-field issues and stuff like that, and continue to do things like stay out past curfew and drink when told not to. I mean, one night it is not too hard, I assume, to make it back by 9 and not have some drinks. But yeah, Andrew Hull is, again, another episode we can talk about.
Yeah, and we of course wish Andrew Hull all the best with Broadmeadows Magic and whatever else he's doing in the local MPL leagues in and around Newcastle. We jump forward again, and this one is a source of much derision. I'm not sure how this group is actually going to be split relating to this particular group. This is the Mariners' active support, effectively, unlike, terraces that take place in other competitions, unlike, the Cove that you've got up there in Sydney, Alex. This brass band is the main vocal support for the Mariners group. There is a part of me that loves this and thinks they're trying to do something unique. They're trying to do something different, having a brass band play all throughout the match. But then there's another part of me that thinks they are missing out on a significant aspect of the football atmosphere. What are your immediate thoughts, Bran, on the brass band for Central Coast?
I'm not a fan. I'm going to be honest. I'm not a fan. I get what you mean with, they're trying to do something different, trying to do something unique. But, it was also unique to sign a former Olympic gold medalist sprinter, to your club, where sometimes unique isn't always good. The main thing for me, I think, is it's just not football. Brass bands in active areas, it's just not football for me. It's a thumbs down.
Yeah, I've only been to Gosford Stadium once, or Central Coast Stadium once, and I got sunburnt and drank too much, so my recollection of the brass band isn't that great. But Alex, you've done a couple of good trips down or up to Gosford itself. What are some of your thoughts on the brass band?
I actually really enjoy the brass band, I'm not going to lie. I think I enjoy the brass band because it's so Mariners that it just works. I think it speaks to the day that when you go away to Gosford, and you don't experience what you would experience on an away day to Bank West now or down to play City or Victory, where you get a bit of animosity and stuff like that. You go to the Central Coast, you walk from the train station, it's pretty easy. And then you walk in and you hear a bit of a brass band, and yeah, I don't know, I like the vibe. It matches the palm trees for me.
Yeah, and it should be credited as well. Different to the same Bolt thing, which was like them pulling the trigger on something. They have been doing this, I'm pretty sure, since the very first season of the A-League. For better or worse, they are now committed to it, and it is probably one of the longest running pieces of cultural heritage, not just for the Mariners, but in the A-League itself as well. So, we wish all the brass band people all the best as well in their continued journey with the Mariners themselves.
Does that mean you have to audition when you buy a Central Coast Mariners active area support membership? You don't just buy it, you have to audition?
Yeah, there's a tryout, definitely, for sure. Yeah. You got to send in a show reel.
Instrument to buy it.
Yeah, that's all it is, though. You just have to have the instrument. You don't have to be able to play it. You've just got to bring it and stand it. Jumping forward to one that potentially isn't the Central Coast fault, but whenever anything goes wrong in the A-League, they are always not far from the action. This was a game actually at Amy Park between Melbourne Victory and Central Coast 2 seasons ago, where the top corner of the net ripped for whatever reason. You can see here Ben Kennedy forced an outstretched arm up there to assist Costa Barbarousis, being held up by, I think, the Melbourne Victory physio to tape down the net so that the game could continue. Not quite as bad as losing a goal, but their record of trying to maintain equipment and respecting that equipment throughout the course of the 90 minutes is not the best as far as the A-League is concerned. I don't think we need to discuss this one particularly too far, but it's just they had the worst run of luck when it comes to equipment and keeping it working throughout the course of a 90-minute period. Jumping forward to the next one, and this, of course, for those of you who have been listening to the podcast all the way through, was Bran's nomination for the Reserve Team Hall of Fame. Potentially, if you enjoy this image, you can head to our Twitter account at the Reserve Team AUS to vote in the poll to nominate or to get this nomination into the Hall of Fame as the first entry. Do you want to talk us through the story again, Bran? Newcastle away day?
Yeah, it's absolutely iconic. So, I mean, again, I just love the fact that the Mariners actually have not only the inflatable sauce bottles, but the people who dress up as the mascots and walk around as the sauce bottle. I think that would just be one of the great jobs in Australian football. So they were playing the Newcastle Jets F3 derby, walking past the Jets away fans. I think from the video, they're yelling, "Who are ya?" to the sauce bottle, which is comedic in itself, and he then replies with the middle finger. It's so good. I love it.
Those unpaid sports development interns, they don't get enough respect. Alex, do you remember this? Perhaps, probably, I think in the last 5 years, the most meme-worthy incident within Central Coast's recent history.
Yeah, I think a lot of the memes that have come out of the league have come relating to Central Coast, but this has to be one of the best. A person who is paid to be a mascot and be friendly to people, albeit they might be away supporters, just having a bit of a brain snap potentially and going, you know what, I've had enough. I can't deal with it. They should know who I am. I'm the barbecue sauce bottle. Get lost.
Yeah. I don't know how I'd feel if I got flipped off by a sauce bottle. I'd feel pretty traumatized.
I think you'd have a good look in the mirror about the decisions you were making in your life if barbecue sauce is that disappointed in something that you're saying to them.
But also, we haven't seen the mascots of any other A-League clubs stand up for their club like that,
Well, I do have a story. We are going to do in the next couple of weeks for future content to people to look at the best mascots in the A-League as a tier list video. I have a couple of stories that I can tell you in that one, Bran, about different mascots and their performance on and off the pitch. We jump forward now to this one, again, I think is going to divide us a little bit. The Palm Tree kit. Kappa was released in this kit. It's got kind of, a decent little template collar. It looks like it's made of silky velvet, but to try and give it a unique Central Coast spin in honour of the palm trees that line, is it the eastern side of Central Coast Stadium, I think? They have put the silhouette of the palm tree across the home, the away navy kit, and the goalkeeper black kit. I'm not ashamed at all to admit that I actually really like this kit. It's something unique. It's something different. Bran, you're the man wearing the Central Coast kit. You are the kit collector, even though you've got the very sharp Socceroos training kit on as well, Alex. I'm definitely underdressed. What are some of your initial thoughts, Bran, on the palm tree kit?
I love it. I'm with you. I think it's good. I think a lot of the time, every season or two, that hasn't been done before, that's unique, that's exciting, I don't mind it. It's something that resonates with the Central Coast Mariners. When you think of Central Coast Stadium in Gosford, those palm trees are iconic. So I think, full credit to them for giving it a go. I've also heard this kit referred to as the Sideshow Bob kit because it's sort of got a bit of his hair going on from the looks of it. For me, though, it's a pass, and it's not too dissimilar either from the MacArthur kit that they've released for this year with the sort of off-centre logo on the front there.
What are your thoughts on the palm tree kit, Alex, or the Sideshow Bob kit? You can call it whatever you want.
I agree with you guys as well. I think it's one of the better kits. Beats the barcode kit that Bran is wearing, in my opinion. I think why not go for it? Why not try something different? Use what is important to the stadium and what creates the atmosphere at the stadium. It doesn't make noise, but it is part of what is so appealing about going to Gosford is those palm trees. So I think by all means, put it in, and I think it worked. I mean, there's been worse kits, there have been better, but it's not terrible. And I'm sure if we see like a cannon on a kit soon or a sauce bottle, it could get even better.
Yeah, that would be the peak A-League if they can bring out this kit again, but it's the silhouette of the sauce bottle just flipping off the Newcastle fans. That would be that. I think all three of us would probably buy a version of that kit throughout the course of the season.
Definitely.
Now, jumping forward to happier news, there are very few highlights as far as the Central Coast is concerned in the last few years, but you do have to give a ton of credit to their social media team. They have been nailing it over the last 18 months or so. This is Marvin, their mascot, who is a horrific, violent human being, if he even is a human being. He has given the A-League probably some of its best social media memories over the last 12 to 18 months, I guess. Alex, I'll go to you first. What are your thoughts on Marvin, the mascot, and what sort of standards is he setting for the rest of the division?
I think Marvin is probably the politically correct barbecue sauce bottle who you can market to the A-League. They can get away with it without him flipping people off, and I think it's fantastic. Like, you're getting people chatting about your team. He's hilarious, and it's just creating good content, really.
Yeah, and I should note for people, this is Marvin standing over the fallen body of a security guard in one of their more famous social media videos. I think it is the pinned video still on the Central Coast social media channel, so you can go and check those out. There will be links in the description below if you want to check it out. Bran, what are your thoughts on Marvin as a mascot and overall for the A-League itself?
I love him. I love him as well. I think it's fantastic. I think it's a great idea for the Central Coast Mariners. They've really sort of embraced that whole kind of meme sort of bit of a joke of the not a joke of the league, but where they've sort of had those comical moments associated with them. They're doing the same thing now, but they're on the front foot of all of them. So I think it's fantastic for that. They've really embraced it. He's really got quite a large cult following. I can't think of any mascot in Australia that has the same kind of reputation as him. You'd have to start looking at some of the ones in the US, but I just think it's great. I think he's embodies the Mariners well. You know, when we talk about everything across their history, all the memes, everything that's gone on, he peak Central Coast. I love it.
Yeah, and I think humour is a really difficult thing to get right on social media. But so far, Central Coast, with this whole Marvin kind of topic and Marvin's takeovers and whatever else, they seem to be getting it very, very right. So credit to them and credit to all the team. But that actually brings our meme team review to a close. We will jump back in and we'll get some final thoughts and stuff before we finish up this episode. So jumping back in against gents, we have followed quite the journey for Central Coast, right from foundation all the way through to the modern era, focusing on, you know, their original highlights over the first few years, their big period of success under Graham Arnold, and then their recent decline, or as we're now calling it for you, Bran, the plummet. I'll let you guys have, you know, final thoughts on what you would want to say, maybe just even to some Central Coast Mariners fans that might be watching, hoping for better times for their club coming ahead. Alex, we'll go to you first.
I hope that the Central Coast keep their license initially and continue to play football, whether it be poorly or well, and can build on hopefully just one or two youngsters that come through and can even get to a similar level of where you've had your Rogic's and Aminis go for the benefit of the Central Coast, for the league and for the Socceroos. And hopefully they continue to make great content with Marvin because it keeps all of us entertained. And yeah, I think if they can give Stayich a bit of stability, give him a decent amount of time, they can definitely bounce back from this, like you've seen the Knicks bounce back in the past 2 seasons.
And what about your thoughts, Bran?
I mean, I think we've all said it. We all really like the Mariners, and we really want them to do well. And I hope they do stay in the league and that they can return to the top end of the competition. And I think just going back and looking through some of the stuff, in particularly for the first 9 seasons. I think it's so easily forgotten how good they were. And like when you sort of take a look at, you know, those teams that made the grand finals and you have a look at some of the stats, you know, like most points, most grand final appearances, second most wins through that first 9 seasons. It's remarkable how good they really were. And when you look at their history, it's really sort of nicely split into really, really good and really, really bad. So I just hope that we can start seeing them, you know, turning the club around. And I think, Alex, the example you have with Wellington, I think that's perfect.
Yeah, I think we're all pretty much aligned here that we want a Mariners side in the division. We want them to be successful, maybe not as successful at the expense of our own club's success, but we certainly want them in and around and involved, given that they have been, I think, adding a lot of rich cultural history to the league, both on the field in their early period and, you know, as the leading meme generators for the division itself. And for Central Coast fans and for that local community in Gosford, we want them to be doing as well as humanly possible. But that does bring down the curtain a little bit, gents, on the very first Reserve Team podcast. I want to thank you both a tremendous amount for joining me today. Alex, if people want to hear further about your content, where on social media can they reach you? What other sort of projects are you involved in?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter, AlexD_WIER. And I also run my own podcast as well at the moment called Chitty Chatter. So plenty of Australian football talks happening both on those platforms. And yeah, happy to be involved in the first episode and be working with you guys on this kind of content.
Of course. And for yourself, Bran?
Yeah, I've just had a great night sitting here talking football with you guys. It's been a fantastic time, a fantastic club to talk about, and, you know, plenty of memorable moments to unpack there. I am on social media. I'm on Twitter at Branson Gibson, SEN for Branson. Bit of a weird one. Cheers, Dad. I also do a podcast as well, the Semi-Pro Potty. It's a mate and I focusing on the NPL, in particularly the NPL in Victoria. Spoiler alert, there are a lot of kits as part of that as well. So that's a key factor that goes along with the NPL as well.
Yeah, and again, if anybody wants to check out either the social media content or the podcast content from either of the previous 2 gentlemen, there will be links down in the description below. But really, more than anything, thank you very much for joining us for the very first Reserve Team podcast. We will see you guys again next week with a new topic, a variety of different guests that we're going to have joining us throughout the course of the year as well. But really, more than anything, we just appreciate your guys' time and everybody listening along with us. As always, on behalf of myself, Sean, on behalf of Bran, and on behalf of Alex, thanks very much for watching. And we'll see you all again next time.